If you walk down this street in Budapest, Hungary, just blocks from the Danube, right in front of an art gallery, you will find a life-size bronze statue that doesn't look like it belongs there. If you're a fan of classic television, it might just look familiar, because it's none other than Inspector Columbo, the charming, rumpled raincoat detective played by American actor Peter Falk in countless TV movies between 1968 and 2003. There's even a statue of Columbo's dog, a basset hound known simply as, well, dog. Now, the story of this statue and what it's doing here in Budapest is complex and mysterious in its own right, but it's not the story I'm going to tell in this video. I'm starting here just to show you the immense cultural reach of the character of Columbo, the detective. I love Columbo, you probably love Columbo, or you wouldn't have clicked on this video. Columbo has been undergoing something of a renaissance in the 20-teens and 20s. Though the last show was created more than 20 years ago, and Falk himself died in 2011, Columbo, the series, continues to inspire the genre of mystery today. The recent Peacock TV series Poker Face, as well as the CBS show Elsbeth, are direct homages to the style of Columbo, the how catch 'em or reverse mystery, where the audience knows who did it and how, but watches the detective piece the crime together. So if you're a regular fan of Columbo and have gone back through all the TV movies multiple times, as I have, do you remember that one that was set aboard a cruise ship? It was called Troubled Waters, and it aired on February 9th, 1975. Directed by Ben Gazzara, the actor, Troubled Waters is one of the few Columbo episodes that goes on location, outside of Los Angeles, the detective's usual haunt. The killer, played by veteran character actor Robert Vaughn, is an auto dealership magnate who boards a cruise ship bound for Acapulco, on which his mistress is also sailing. The killer bumps off the mistress, but as his alibi, he fakes a mild heart attack so he can make everybody think he's in the ship's infirmary at the time the murder is committed. It's his misfortune that Columbo and his wife are on vacation aboard the same ship, and Columbo, of course, solves the murder. As episodes of Columbo go, this one is pretty good, but as a ship buff, naturally it interests me because it was filmed almost entirely aboard a real passenger ship, the Sun Princess. The episode presents us with a fascinating snapshot in time of what a cruise ship, particularly its interiors, was like in the mid-70s. When, after seeing the show, I looked up information on the real Sun Princess, I was amazed at what a strange life and career this ship really had. Long beyond Columbo's time, the Sun Princess, which is originally known as the Spirit of London, survived well into this century, ultimately meeting an ignominious end in 2016. It's a subject tailor-made for one of my ship profile videos, which I haven't done for a long time. So, with all due respect to Inspector Columbo, who is only a tiny but important part of the story, let's look at the fascinating history of the Sun Princess. I mean, the Spirit of London, or the Southern Cross, or the Ocean Dream. What do we call this ship anyway? Let's just call her Columbo's cruise ship. Hi, I'm Sean Munger. I have a PhD in history, and most of you know me for my very long, context-heavy deep dive videos, of which this is not one. If you haven't been watching my channel for a long time, you might not know that before I started doing the deep dives, like the meaning of the Titanic, or the Oswald Acted Alone series, oops, just lost 5,000 subscribers there, or Iran-Contra and Franklin Pierce and such, before that I did a number of videos on ships, including but not limited to ocean liners. I did one on the Bremen, another one on the Second Mauretania, one on the Morro Castle disaster of 1934, and some military ships like the USS Shangri-La and the Vincennes. There was a section on ocean liners in my recent video on August 1939. Since I didn't do a long deep dive video this month, I thought just for grins, I'd do a one-off video in that old format, and a video that's not 2.5 hours long. Plus, it's Columbo related. Come on, we all love Columbo. If you don't love Columbo, what the hell is wrong with you? Click off this and go watch cat videos or something. Seriously, go! With that taken care of, let's delve into the background of this fascinating ship. This is the Riva Trigoso shipyard in Genoa, Italy. There's been a shipyard on this site since 1897, but what you see here was constructed after World War II. The yard was damaged heavily by Allied bombing during the war. Riva Trigoso built commercial and military ships for numerous private companies and successive Italian governments, including the fascist Mussolini regime and the modern post-war country of Italy. In 1970, Norwegian Caribbean Lines, which had only been in existence for 4 years by that time, placed an order with this shipyard to build a new cruise vessel, which would be called the Seaward. NCL had burst on the shipping scene with their original ship, the Sunward, which was designed to carry passengers and their cars from the UK to Gibraltar. The Sunward was custom built for British tourists headed on long holidays with their cars in southern Europe and the Riviera. And for one season, 1966, it was gangbusters. But then the idea was ruined by fascists, who tend to ruin everything. Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator of Spain, closed the border between Spain and the British-held port of Gibraltar, thus ending it as a destination for Mediterranean-bound tourists. So much for the Sunward. So, Knut Kloster, the Norwegian genius behind NCL, came up with a different idea. Why not send the Sunward to the Caribbean, a burgeoning tourist and cruise market? And why not buy some more ships to add to the service? He did, ordering the Starward in 1968 and Skyward in 1969, both built in Bremen, West Germany. These ships, like Sunward, were designed to carry cars. Because, of course, when you go on vacation to a Caribbean island, the main thing you want to do there is drive your own car around, right? NCL kept expanding. Kloster ordered 2 more new ships, this time from this yard, Riva Trigoso. The first of these was Seaward, the first ship to be ordered for Norwegian Caribbean Lines that would not have car ferrying as a major design element. Unfortunately, just after the order was placed, Riva Trigoso shipyard ran into financial difficulties. The yard was semi-nationalized by being taken over by an entity called the Institute for Industrial Reconstruction, a state body whose task was to bail out Italian companies in crisis. After IRI took over the shipyard, they canceled construction of the Seaward. NCL was furious and tried to force the shipyard to finish construction. Ultimately, they did, but before construction was complete, in March 1972, NCL sold the as-yet uncompleted ship to P&O Lines, Peninsula and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, one of Britain's venerable old shipping companies. They renamed her Spirit of London. As you might have gathered, the passenger ship trade was in considerable flux in the early 1970s. The era of the great transatlantic ocean liners had passed with the retirement of the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth in 1967 and 68. Most passengers now traveled between continents on jets, especially Pan Am's. See my video on that story. So the ship trade was moving toward pleasure cruises, which made tropical destinations like the Caribbean or Mexican ports such as Cozumel and Acapulco the name of the game. Just to be clear, Seaward/Spirit of London was not an ocean liner, but a cruise ship. There's a difference. Ocean liners are vessels designed for the particular purpose of transportation, point A to point B. They have thicker hulls and slightly different hydrodynamic designs. Cruise ships are designed for vacation experiences. They generally have thinner hulls and travel at slower speeds. There were no true ocean liners built between 1969, when the Queen Elizabeth II was put into service, and 2004, when the Queen Mary II came out. And to be sure, the Queen Elizabeth II was always conceived as a dual-purpose ship. Cruise ship and ocean liner rolled into one. So, with that mishegas out of the way, let's get back to the Spirit of London. The ship was 537 feet long, about 163 meters, had a beam of 75 feet, about 22 meters, and a gross tonnage of 17,042. That's kind of small compared to the big passenger liners of the Golden Age, but a standard size for a 1970s cruise ship. Depending on how she was outfitted, she could accommodate between 730 and 1,000 passengers. Her average speed was about 20.5 knots. Spirit of London had various amenities, reflecting the new priorities of the cruise ship era. Amidships, there was what was called the Churchill Room, which P&O advertised as being, quote, comparable to a London nightclub. I believe this is the room, probably under a different name, where the victim of the murder, played by Poupée Bukhar, sings with Dean Stockwell on accompaniment in the Columbo episode. In addition to the usual restaurants and bars, Spirit of London was fitted out with a space called the Beehive, a club for teenagers, with, quote, an open area for dancing, soft drink machines, and a nearby table tennis court. Shipping lines had been experimenting with teen-oriented spaces for a number of years, without that much success. I have no idea how successful this attempt was. P&O intended Spirit of London for Pacific cruises. She would base mostly out of Los Angeles, serving Mexican ports such as Mazatlan, Puerto Vallarta, Manzanillo, and Acapulco during the spring. In summer, P&O was going to put her on the Alaska circuit, the Inside Passage, which was at that time just starting to become popular as a cruise destination. Spirit of London was launched in Genoa on May 9, 1972. In October, she was delivered from the shipyard in Genoa to Southampton, England, where sailing in on a gray autumn day, she was welcomed by the sailing brig Royalist, a training ship for the Marine Society and Sea Cadets. Expectations were high for Spirit of London. All berths aboard her, 736, were sold for her maiden voyage in July, 3 months before the ship even entered British waters. Indeed, the first 4 cruises were sold out by the time she got to England. The ship sailed with passengers for the first time from Southampton on November 11, 1972, bound for San Juan, Puerto Rico. She was under the command of Captain Gerald McGowan, with Chief Executive Officer Ian Gibb. The ship's gala send-off was attended by, among others, actress and singer Carol Channing, who was touring in London at the time. After reaching San Juan, Spirit of London took her first Caribbean cruises, ending up in Miami, then through the Panama Canal to Los Angeles. The first of the scheduled Mexican cruises departed in January 1973 and was heavily promoted in newspapers on the west coast of the U.S. Prices ranged from $370 to $1,075, the equivalent of about $2,700 to $7,900 in today's money. Things were good in the early days. In 1973, a travel writer for a Southern California paper took a cruise aboard the Spirit of London and wrote a column on it. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what his opinion of the experience was, because he may have been drunk when he wrote it. Here's a quote. "And if you happen to be one of the city slickers aboard the Spirit of London, heading out from San Pedro on P&O's 10-day Mexican cruise, so goes yous go. Right away you feel yourself being drawn into a harem-scarum, devil-may-carum, Jonesian fantasy with a rich blend of British blimey and Mother Brown's knees, and you find your jaded self shouting in mock regret, 'Stop the ship, I want to get off.'" End quote. I have absolutely no idea what that means, but whatever. In October 1973, a coalition of Arab countries attacked Israel in what came to be known as the Yom Kippur War. To punish the United States for its military and political support of Israel, Middle Eastern oil-producing countries throttled the supply of petroleum, causing a severe energy crisis in the U.S. Due to increasing fuel costs, in December 1973, P&O canceled one of the Spirit's scheduled Mexican cruises and made alterations to its cruise schedule thereafter, because the ship's cruising speed was to be reduced in order to conserve fuel. This was the first hint of trouble in paradise for the Spirit of London. In the summer of 1974, P&O Lines negotiated to purchase a Seattle-based cruise line company, Princess Cruises. The purchase price was not publicly disclosed. Princess had been having some luck in the previous few years, particularly with those Alaska-based cruises. However, instead of simply absorbing Princess, P&O kept their LA-based cruised operation alive and under the Princess name. They also transferred the Spirit of London, which was operating out of the West Coast anyway, to that division. When Spirit of London was put into dry dock in October 1974 for yearly refit at the end of its second season of cruising, it was remodeled, refurbished, and given a new name. Princess Cruises branded all their ships with the Princess name. Thus, having sailed as Spirit of London for barely 2 years, the ship was renamed Sun Princess. On October 17, 1974, the Sun Princess sailed from San Francisco to what was called the Mexican Riviera. Essentially the same itinerary as before. The crew was British, just as it had been before. This was the opening chapter of the ship's new life. Incidentally, at the same time as it was acquired by P&O Lines, Princess Cruises purchased 2 ships for the West Coast Mexican Riviera circuit, the Sea Venture and Island Venture, which had been built in West Germany for the company Flagship Cruises. Those 2 ships, particularly the second one, also saw a lot of television action in the late 70s. The Island Venture was renamed Pacific Princess, and that was the ship on which the show The Love Boat took place. The former Sea Venture, renamed Island Princess, occasionally stood in for her. The first voyage of the Sun Princess under its new name was also the voyage on which the Columbo episode was filmed. Indeed, Princess Cruises advertised the cruise as the Columbo Voyage, where an episode would be filmed on board. The cruise and the film shoot lasted 12 days, beginning on October 17, 1974. In addition to the show's star Peter Falk, other celebrities on board for that cruise included Patrick Macnee, star of The Avengers. No, not that Avengers, I mean the real Avengers, the 1960s British TV show that also starred Diana Rigg. Both Macnee and Rigg went on to appear in the James Bond franchise. Dean Stockwell plays a suspect of the murder. Robert Vaughn, a wonderful actor and reportedly very nice man to work with, played the murderer. The nurse, a crucial character in the plot, was played by character actress Susan DeMonte. Earlier this year, in May 2024, DeMonte was a guest on the Columbo-themed podcast Trenchcoat Cigar Peugeot, Wandering with Columbo. The episode, in which Susan DeMonte talks a bit about the making of the film, is linked in the description to this video, and was one of the sources I used. Check it out. On this particular voyage, apparently seasickness was a major problem among the cast, crew, and passengers. If you watch the episode, the sea does appear to be fairly choppy, and what you'll notice immediately in all the scenes filmed outside on the deck is that it's quite windy, which does tend to happen at sea. Kind of a problem for actors who wear bushy toupees, as were common in the 1970s, and also the big flappy collars like the 747 scale wingspan you see on some of Mr. Vaughn's costumes. I was also somewhat shocked by how chintzy the ship looked. I mean, honestly, it didn't look that good, kind of like a cheap hotel, which is why I was surprised to learn that the episode was filmed right after the ship's renovation and refurbishment. Then again, maybe all cruise ships in the 70s looked like that. My only shipboard experience to date was a transatlantic voyage aboard the Queen Mary II in 2008. Yes, I was much thinner then. I don't know, maybe I was spoiled by the opulence. But Troubled Waters is an excellent episode of Columbo. Most fans of the series seem to agree on that. Aside from the seasickness, particularly during a storm that struck on the last night of the voyage and delayed the ship's return to San Francisco slightly, the filming seems to have gone smoothly, and there were no major incidents. Watch the episode. It's fun. I'm going to move a little more quickly through the subsequent history of the Sun Princess, or whatever you want to call her. She had a lot of names over the course of her career. The ship continued to sail for Princess Cruises throughout the 1970s and 80s, sometimes to the Mexican Riviera, other times the Caribbean, sometimes Alaska, the Inside Passage, and Vancouver, British Columbia, where she was a fixture. Princess Cruises banked heavily on the popularity of its ships as a result of the Love Boat series. Cruise ads from this period consistently billed Sun Princess as the sister ship of the Love Boat, even though it wasn't at all. Sister ships are those of fundamentally similar design, usually built by the same line and often by the same builders. As we know, the Spirit of London was a totally different ship than the German-built vessels that most often starred as the Love Boat. On October 14, 1979, around midnight, while on a cruise from Portland, Oregon to the Mexican Riviera, fire broke out in one of the laundry rooms aboard the Sun Princess. The cause of the fire wasn't reported. The captain announced the fire to the passengers, but the blaze was controlled within 20 minutes and no serious damage was done. Sun Princess was lucky. Fires aboard ships can be catastrophic. Watch my video on the Morro Castle if you want an example. By 1988, the cruise industry had changed. The ships that were new, sleek, and compact in the early 70s now seemed antiquated and outdated, dwarfed by larger vessels with more sophisticated onboard entertainment. And there was a frenzy of corporate activity, mostly purchases and mergers, reflecting the seismic shifts in the industry. In the summer of 1988, Princess Cruises sold the Sun Princess to the Premier Cruises Company, owned by the same company that operated Greyhound buses. After 15 seasons of visiting the Canadian Pacific coast, Sun Princess left Vancouver for the last time on September 21st, 1988. After refit, she was renamed the Starship Majestic, yes, there's a / in that name, and was intended for cruises between Port Canaveral, Florida, and various company-owned vacation islands in the Caribbean, which began in the spring of 1989. Star / Majestic essentially became a Disney ship. Premier Cruises got the concession to be Disney's official cruise partner. This was before Disney started building their own ships. The Disney ships were painted red and known as the Big Red Boats. I know Disney Cruises have a lot of fans, but to me, this seems like kind of a sad period for this good old ship. She was aging, not as big or flashy or glamorous as the newcomers on the scene, and instead of Peter Falk and Ben Gazzara, her decks were trodden by people wearing big cartoon Disney heads. A woman named Jean Kossoff, a staff writer for the Raleigh, North Carolina News and Observer, wrote an account of a cruise aboard the Star / Majestic during this period, and it was pretty scathing. It was the cruise from hell, her story began, or at the least, purgatory. She complained of chronic seasickness and nicknamed the ship the Barf Boat. Cruise liners and ship designers often hand-wave away seasickness as something uncontrollable, an inescapable hazard of being at sea. To a large extent it is, but it is also true that some ships are more prone to it than others. Tender is the seafaring term for it. In the sources I couldn't find specific mention of the Spirit of London being described this way, but given the number of times the subject of seasickness does come up in the sources, I wonder if it was a particular problem for this ship. There was a near disaster during this period. On July 14, 1991, at about 2 a.m., a fire broke out in the ship's auxiliary engine room. The Majestic was at the time sailing about 40 miles northwest of Freeport in the Bahamas, returning to Port Canaveral. The crew mustered the passengers on deck to emergency lifeboat stations with life jackets on. The fire was brought under control quickly, and it turned out the lifeboats didn't need to be launched. But the Majestic's main propulsion was out. The ship required a tow back to Port Canaveral, which extended the passengers' time on board considerably. There were no injuries. The cruise line refunded all the passengers their fares. In 1993, Premier Cruises committed an unforgivable sin against their Disney overlords. They began exploring deals with other leisure companies, such as Warner Brothers, and including non-Disney properties like Universal Studios on their package tours. This included a licensing agreement with Warner Brothers, Disney's archenemy. Disney started to want to get out of business with Premier Cruises, probably for fear of diluting their brand. They were in talks to replace Premier with Carnival or perhaps Royal Caribbean, but those negotiations went nowhere. This was the genesis, in fact, of Disney starting up their own in-house cruise line. That corporate drama does not concern us, but I mention it because it explains what eventually happened to the ship. In 1994, the Majestic was quietly sold to a small outfit called CTC Lines. CTC stands for Charter Travel Club. This was a strange little outfit, formed in 1966, which originally chartered Soviet-built ships. Yes, you heard that right, to take immigrants from the UK to Australia and New Zealand. That business dried up pretty quickly, and CTC went into the cruise business, but still mostly with Soviet-built ships. Guess what happened when the Soviet Union went Tango uniform in 1991? They needed new ships. Premier, mortally wounded by Disney, sold them the Majestic, which CTC renamed Southern Cross. CTC somewhat desperately advertised the Southern Cross, a small and well-used vessel, as its brand new flagship, sailing from Greenock, Scotland to the Canary Islands in North Africa, beginning in 1995. She also sailed to the Caribbean and Mexico and later the Australia circuit. After many years sailing under the mouse ears, the old Spirit of London was British again. But anyone who knows the careers of passenger ships would recognize this era as one of decline for the old ship. She was 23 years old, which is starting to push the limit for the lifespan of cruise ships. She'd been built in and for another era. She was now a discount ship, catering to budget travelers. Indeed, there was nothing ahead for this ship but further demotions. CTC, running into financial trouble, sold Southern Cross in the second half of 1997 to a Greek-owned line called Festival Cruises. They renamed the ship Flamenco. This was now its 5th name if you're counting. Flamenco cruised the usual places: the Caribbean, the Azores, the Mediterranean. It's kind of amazing she managed to survive into this century. Festival Cruises went bankrupt in 2004. There are a lot of twists and turns in the final acts of this old ship's life. In the 2000s and 2010s, she was sold to various successive owners and renamed several more times. New Flamenco in 2004, new owner Fulton Shipping Inc. 2005, a brief stint as a hotel ship at Abu Dhabi in 2007. The scrapyard began to loom as the ship's ultimate fate in about 2010. When it was reported she was sold to scrappers in India, but that deal apparently fell through. By 2012, the Old Spirit of London was owned by a small Hong Kong company called Runfeng Cruises, though the ship was flagged for Sierra Leone. She received a sort of half-hearted overhaul and was renamed yet again to Ocean Dream and set up to run from Hainan Island off the coast of China on short cruises to Vietnam. This duty apparently did not last long. By the end of 2012, Ocean Dream was found illegally parked in the waters off Lam Shabang, Thailand. Port inspectors boarded her and found an appalling scene. According to a news report, this is what they found. Quote, inspectors found 140 frightened Chinese and Burmese crew members, including 30 young women, living illegally on board with expired visas, unpaid wages, dirty accommodation, and very scarce food and water. The inspectors discovered that the ship's safety certificate was about to expire, but no new one had been received. It also emerged that no crew contacts or wages accounts were available on board. End quote. The ship apparently never left Thai waters after that. She sat abandoned off Lam Chabang for a long time, more than a year as of early 2016. The company that owned her by that time was blacklisted from marine insurance coverage for non-payment of fees. The Thai government kept trying to contact the owners to get them to haul her away, but there was no response. On February 27, 2016, the old ship, totally abandoned and with no crew on board, capsized in the waters off Lam Chabang. Leaking oil, she was obviously an environmental disaster. She was scrapped on the spot beginning in 2017. Within 2 years, there was nothing left above the waterline. Ships have life stories, and almost all of them end sadly, with a tragedy of some kind, often a high-profile one, but more often a long, slow decline into irrelevance. Almost all ships, whatever purpose they were built to fulfill, wind up as scrap metal in one way or another. The Spirit of London, which started its life with optimism and hope, wound up a rusting hulk in the waters off Thailand once no one wanted or could use her anymore. The Columbo episode managed to catch her early in her career, when she was still quite new, and there was still the blush of optimism and hope. Now, in the 2020s, the Columbo episode Troubled Waters has proven to have survived longer than the ship itself did. Many people associated with the film are gone now. Robert Vaughn passed away in 2016. Patrick McNee, who played the captain of the Sun Princess, checked out a year earlier in 2015. Peter Falk, of course, who won 3 Emmy Awards for his work on Columbo, died in 2011. Dean Stockwell died in 2021. Ben Gazzara, the director, passed away in 2012. There's still lots of stuff available out there about Columbo, and about this episode in particular, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a fan favorite. But now you know something about the ship that was featured in it.
One thing I almost forgot.
One last loose end that you might be interested in. In the episode Troubled Waters, Columbo and his wife, who is, as always, never seen on screen, are headed to Acapulco on the Sun Princess, as are all the other passengers. Acapulco was a big destination for vacations in the 70s. If you grew up in Gen X as I did, or probably even later, you probably remember Acapulco being mentioned all the time as an exotic destination. You may also have noticed, especially in the last 10 years or so, that it hasn't been anymore. Have you ever wondered why that is? It was, in fact, Princess Cruises, operator of Columbo's cruise ship, who began to coin the term Mexican Riviera in cruise marketing in the 1970s. The genesis of that phrase was much earlier, but they were the first to use it in conjunction with cruises. Acapulco was known for its white sand beaches, its chic hotels, and the spectacular cliff divers, who never ceased to give tourists a show. Unfortunately, as the Mexican drug war ramped up in the 2000s and 2010s, Acapulco became quite a dangerous place. In 2009, a major gun battle broke out in Acapulco between rival drug gangs. Numerous grisly unsolved murders in the city made international headlines, and those headlines often referenced Acapulco's previous status as a tropical destination, thus reinforcing a story of declension and devolution. In 2011, in response to the violence, major cruise lines began dropping certain Mexican Riviera destinations, including Acapulco and Mazatlan, from their itineraries. Between 2006 and 2015, Acapulco lost a staggering 85% of its international tourist trade. Airlines had pulled out too. Mexico and the world have changed a lot since 1975. Anyway, if you've ever wondered why vacationing in Acapulco is no longer a thing, that's why. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, do all the stuff you normally do for a video you like. I teach history courses online at my website, seanmunger.com. I've got a new one debuting in November. I also write books in various different genres, including mystery and crime. The sources I used to make this video are listed in credits at the end and also in the description below. No part of the research or writing of this video was done with AI. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another long deep dive video. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you as always to my fans and subscribers, and thank you for joining me on another journey into the past.